Hello, everybody. It's Helen Panos, Dynamis Learning Academy, a K through 12 tutoring business. We help children reach their potential. The way we do that is we listen to what a parent needs and match them up with the right type of tutor. That's very important so that then we can customize a plan to reach the child's needs. So we also do SAT, ACT, PSAT, and PACT, all these acronyms. And we are now adding on actually college admissions writing, and I have a great person for that. And also we're doing AP test taking tips. So we'll be adding that to our website here soon. And I just wanted to remind everybody, I do have this summer Lunch and Learn series every Thursday. It's usually at 12 noon. I've had to adjust times, so forgive me a little bit. Some doctor's appointments that don't budge because you know how that goes. They're busy these days. And it then takes 2 more months to get an appointment. So I couldn't do that. And today I have Melissa Schwartz on with me. Welcome, Melissa, from California, right?
Yes, indeed.
So she's on the Pacific Coast time, but I've met Melissa through a podcast networking event virtually, and definitely knew that actually I've interviewed her for my podcast, so you can catch that on Anchor or my website at dynamislearningacademy.com/podcast. And we just released hers, I think, last week, possibly. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's there. And we were going to come on live and talk a little bit more about this topic of high sensitivity in kids, and what's the difference between that and the processing disorder, the sensitivity disorder. Yep. So I'm going to introduce her real quick with her background. Melissa was born an intense, sensitive, empathic power seeker. She's a respected expert in the field of highly sensitive children and brings clarity, personal experience, and compassion for parents raising the HSCs, which are highly sensitive children. She is an internationally acclaimed author, coach, and public speaker, bringing new perspective based on current research and personal experience to transform the field of child development. Melissa is a Stanford University alumni and a graduate of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I went to Boston up there to do my master's too. She lives with her family in Southern California and coaches parents around the world because she can do that virtually, right, Melissa?
These days.
Is all your business virtual?
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Coaching should be easily done that way. I don't know why we weren't thinking about that before.
In-person coaching, local families found it was easier to not have to have a sitter and drive to my office and spend all the time with me. And so, especially for busy parents, it's so much easier to hop on this.
They've saved so much time now, all this virtual stuff. So tell us a little bit. Let's just kick off with your journey to where you are today, because I know you do this with your mom, right?
I do, yeah. So my mom and I started doing this work. We started doing this about 15 years ago, but I only really started coaching in the last 10 plus years. So the short story is I have an older brother who is hardwired very differently than me, super easygoing. And so my mom, when she retired from her long teaching career and running a child corporate daycare center on Wall Street, my parents moved out to California, where my brother and I both moved after we graduated college and law school, respectively. And my mom wasn't done with her work. And so she started, she ran the child center at the local college near where she lives, but she also started doing workshops for parents. And so I was going with her to her workshops to support her work and helping her write her book, Authentic Parenting Power, which I collaborated on with her.
Oh, wow.
And in doing all of that, what we realized was that the parents that were coming to workshops and looking for support had kids that were like me. And this was before I knew about the label of high sensitivity. I just knew that I was more sensitive, more intense, more power seeking than my brother, than other kids. And when I was younger, I went through the gamut of educational testing, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And there was nothing that ever came up, because high sensitivity is not a disorder. It's not a diagnosis. It's not going to show up in any educational testing. And so what ended up happening was, as I was going to workshops with my mom and she would talk about me, and parents recognized that I was in the back of the room swiping credit cards to sell CDs and things, they started coming up and asking me if they could talk to me because I sounded just like their kids. And so they actually asked me to start coaching. And what I realized was I actually had a lot to offer them because I could speak for their children. I could help them get inside of their children's world, understand their children's behavior, and then actually give them tangible steps from an adult perspective to help their children to change their behavior, not by changing who these children were, but by shifting the environment around them so that their behavior wasn't so intense and extreme, and that these kids could be supported and nurtured in a way where they really develop tools, strength-based tools to thrive as sensitive people rather than coping mechanisms to be able to handle life, which doesn't really give them the opportunity to grow into their potential.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's interesting because I know we spoke about this during the podcast that I'm tutoring a child that's definitely highly sensitive. And it is a little different in knowing how to deal with them. And his mom's got that pegged very well, but, and I've been tutoring him now over a year, got him in the gifted program, but now I'm back there tutoring him again on writing, actually, because he's so intelligent, reading on like a 5th grade, 6th grade level, and he's only a rising 2nd grader.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Highly sensitive children tend to be on the more mature side, old souls, kind of having a really deep knowing. That's a generalization. It's not true for every sensitive child, but what's also generally true is that they're also, they've got some perfectionistic tendencies. And so they don't do well with harsh criticism or feedback that they perceive as being mean or unkind, and they don't like to fail at things. So they tend to do pretty well in a classroom. They might struggle more with the environmental factors or the social, emotional stuff going on with their peers. But when it comes to academics, they usually tend to do pretty well because they have this sort of natural affinity for learning, this natural maturity, and this desire really to please and to be successful.
Oh, interesting. So you might have said enough about high sensitivity and what it is. And we know it's not really a disorder, right? So you kind of said that. Anything else you want to add about what it is?
Yeah. So I just want to say that high sensitivity, like I said, it's not a disorder. It's not a diagnostic. It's a genetic temperament trait that is passed down through the family. And it's been scientifically researched, and it's found in approximately 1 in 5 people. So it's 20% of the population. So there are a lot of highly sensitive people that are walking around. They may think something is wrong with them. They may know that they experience life differently than most of their counterparts, or they're just doing really well. There are plenty of highly sensitive people who grow up in an environment where they're nurtured and given tools to succeed, and they don't really struggle a whole lot in life. Being highly sensitive does not mean that there's something wrong, or you're going to have a hard time, or you're going to have to go to therapy, or you're a crybaby. None of those things are true. Okay. So I just kind of want to throw that out there because sometimes high sensitivity gets misinterpreted as just being overly emotional or not being able to handle life, or it gets confused with autism or twice exceptionalism. Not the same as those either. It's its own natural, innate temperament that gets passed down through the genes. It's not something that needs to be fixed or assessed or medicated or treated or anything like that.
So I assume you coach people on how to deal with it then, strategies.
I coach parents on how to give their children the tools that they need to really manage their emotions, to advocate for themselves, to be able to ask for what they need in a classroom or at a friend's house, or as they get older out in the world, going to a doctor. I always talk about how going to the dentist is usually not people's favorite thing to do, especially highly sensitive people who are maybe a little more sensitive to pain, and how advocating when you go to a doctor and saying, before you take that needle out or before you take that machine out, can you tell me what you're going to do so that way I can be prepared? And learning how to ask what you need so that you don't have a freak out or become so dysregulated and overwhelmed that it becomes a really unpleasant experience.
Do you think you're born with this, or does that gene maybe develop more as you get older? You think it's always been there?
We're born with it. And actually, there are parents that come to me when their kids are 6 months old, and they already know that they're highly sensitive.
Wow.
Kids might be a little bit colicky. They might have trouble sleeping. They might be really sensitive to changes in their physical environment, lights, sounds, fabrics. They might really want a wipe that's warm rather than just a cold, wet wipe out of a container. They might need to be fed in a quiet room rather than a room where there's a lot of stimulation. So we can actually notice signs of high sensitivity in infants from the very, very beginning.
And does it usually pair up with something else? Like a lot of, disabilities, let's say, will pair, like ADHD pairs up with, anxiety sometimes. Or is this the type of thing, since it's not a disorder, is it a type of thing that maybe comes along with OCD or something else?
So there are all sorts of comorbidities that can show up with high sensitivity. And actually, Elaine Aron, who's sort of the godmother of the movement, wrote a book for psychotherapy. I believe it's for therapists or psychotherapists and high sensitivity. And in that book, she actually talks about all sorts of diagnoses from the DSM-5 and how they dovetail and overlap with high sensitivity. Mm-hmm. The things that I see most commonly are things like anxiety. I see a lot of children who have been diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder. Sometimes there's some depression or ADHD that might show up, but they don't necessarily travel together. In fact, things in my opinion, my perspective, things like anxiety and ODD tend to develop in a child who hasn't been given the tools to process and express their emotions in an appropriate and healthy way, or hasn't been given age-appropriate limits and boundaries and healthy consequences. Maybe they've been given harsh punishments or discipline that doesn't feel good for them, or they're feeling really disempowered, and so they're looking for power in other places. So when parents come to me with a diagnosis on a highly sensitive child, I usually like to kind of start at the beginning and say, when did these symptoms begin? What was going on for the child in the very beginning? Was there a loss? Was there a trauma? Was there a move, a new baby, a death in the family? Did they start a school that they didn't like? And we can usually pinpoint when those behaviors started, and we can actually help the child reprocess what was going on for them and give the parents new tools to use with their child so that the anxiety or the ODD, those behaviors that were diagnosed, seem to disappear, because now we're really coming at the sensitivity at the root. So yes, there can be things that show up with high sensitivity, but no, it's not indicative. It doesn't mean that high sensitivity means you will have any sort of diagnostic. It's not a guarantee that something's going to show up.
Mm-hmm. So how can an adult tell that a child is highly sensitive? What are the, triggers or things that they might be looking out for?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would always look out for are tantrums, kids breaking down a lot, having a really hard time dealing with transitions, no's, changes of plans, things that haven't gone the way that they were expecting. The other thing is these kids have really big emotions, more saturated, more intense emotions. I always describe it like the non-highly sensitive child has a box of crayons that's like the primary colors, like 8 emotions. And then the highly sensitive child, the non-highly sensitive child, the highly sensitive child has the value box with like 164 crayons, all different shades, more nuanced, more vibrant. So the joys are more joyful and the lows are lower. And kids that are highly sensitive are accessing emotions that other children might not even know about. So things like feeling bittersweet, where there's like joy and sadness at the same time. A highly sensitive child is probably in touch with that experience. They recognize it. They could tell you when they felt those, combinations of feelings. So kids that feel more intensely have more breakdowns. And also kids that notice subtleties. They might say to you when they come in to see you, "Oh, Helen, your hair looks different today," or "Is that a different color lipstick?" or "What's that lovely smell in here?" Like they're just kind of more tuned in to what's going on. They're noticing things that other kids might not pick up on. And again, being highly sensitive isn't all negative. It's not all bad. It's really lovely to be able to notice subtleties in life.
Right. That's true.
Savor the small details as we experience them. So those are some of the kind of the hallmarks that we look for in a highly sensitive child.
So at what point, this is kind of a little different question that just came up to my mind is, like at what point should a parent let a child know that they are highly sensitive? Because I think I might have been, now I'm thinking back in my early 20s. But now I think I recognize it now as an adult if I'm getting more sensitive about, and I have to sit down and think about it like, why am I being bothered by that? Right. So I think now that we're armed with a lot more information in this world and looking things up on Google and everything, and coaches like yourself that can help, is it at some point, a good idea, I would think, to share with a child at what age should they be told that they are highly sensitive so they don't think there's something wrong with them, right?
Yeah. So I think it's a great idea as soon as a parent is aware of it to begin introducing that kind of language to children. And I actually wrote a children's book about a race car, which is highly sensitive, because I love to use the metaphor that highly sensitive children are like a race car. A non-highly sensitive child is more like a Prius, low maintenance, but their performance, even at their peak, is a little underwhelming, whereas a really fine-tuned race car is the most fun car on the road. And highly sensitive children are just like that. When they are really, really tuned in, when all of their needs are met, and they are high needs and demanding, but when all of those needs are met, they're the most fun car on the road. They're the most intelligent, joyful, sweet, creative, inventive children that are around. So part of why I wrote this book was to normalize it for children, to help them understand that there is nothing wrong with them. The other reason why I love this book is because in the back of it, we actually made a whole page for adults where we show them where in the book we model the tools that I teach to parents in coaching. So how to speak to a child, how to validate their feelings instead of talk them out of it, how to teach them breathing practices and meditative practices. These are skills that kids can learn when they're younger that can really help them all the way through life. So yes, I'm fully in favor of telling a child, once you have the language to identify that that's what's going on for them, hey, you're highly sensitive. You just feel things more deeply than other people do. Nothing wrong with it.
How do people get your book? When did you write that?
Yeah, this book came out in December of 2021. It's available on Amazon, Rico the Race Car. And actually, we're working on another book in the series where we introduce a new race car who is both highly sensitive and has sensory processing disorder, because those do travel, again, often together, not always. But there are some highly sensitive children who have more responsive sensory systems than others. And when those sensory systems are more responsive and the brain disorders that sensory input, so it hears a toilet flushing, for example, out in a public restroom, and the brain hears that signal and says, danger, danger, danger. And a child freaks out. They'd have like a full-on meltdown because it's too loud. I can't do it. I don't want to go in there. That is beyond high sensitivity. Now what we're talking about is when there's a sensory input that actually prevents a child from being able to move through a daily task. That's when we're talking about sensory processing disorder. That's when we want to bring in some occupational therapy, have a sensory evaluation for a child, really see what it is that's going on inside of their nervous and brain, their nervous system and their brain, to see if we can help reorganize the way their sensory systems are processing environmental stimuli, because now we're talking about something else. So the first book in the RICO series, Pure Sensitivity. The next book, the one that I'm currently working on, is going to bring in the idea of high sensitivity and sensory processing disorder, because there are a lot of kids that have both. And those children can really be misdiagnosed with other things because a lot of people in the field of medicine or education don't know about this stuff. That's why I'm so passionate about talking about it and educating and bringing new awareness to what could be driving some of these behaviors in children.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be my next question, was what's the differences between highly sensitive and sensory processing disorder? So any other things you want to say about the differences?
Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. I know that we don't have that much time here, and usually when I talk about this stuff, it can go on for like a good hour because there's so much information. But what I want to say for parents that are listening, for professionals that are listening, is if you're seeing a child who is legitimately struggling to get through an experience because their sensory system is overwhelmed, whether it's too bright, too loud, their clothing is too uncomfortable, the texture of a food is too yucky, it smells too gross, something inside their body really doesn't feel right, they can't put their socks and shoes on. If it's legitimate, if they're not just doing that to manipulate because they don't want to do something, which sometimes can be hard to identify.
Right. I was going to say.
Yeah. But if it's legitimate, if it's happening on a regular basis with whichever care provider is showing up for them, it's not just mom or just the nanny or just the teacher, then I would really encourage looking into a sensory evaluation from an occupational therapist so that you can sort out if there's some sensory processing disorder going on. That's the real dividing line that we look at. Is the child unable to move through the discomfort? You know, a highly sensitive child might not like certain foods, but they can eat them, or they can tolerate it being on the plate, or they might not want to wear those shoes, but they'll put them on because they want to go to the park, or they might not like how their wet shirt feels from splashing in the water, but they can handle it. A child with sensory processing disorder cannot handle the food on the plate, cannot put those shoes on, has to take the wet shirt off.
Yeah.
It is so disruptive to their nervous system that they can't get beyond it.
Yeah, I think I know a child that was like that years ago.
Yeah.
That would be exactly the way. Lighting would bother him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to say that so high sensitivity shows up in about 20% of the population, and sensory processing disorder is in like 5 to 15% of the population. So that area of overlap, maybe somewhere 5 to 10%. It's hard to say exactly. There hasn't been enough research done on this. I'm one of the first people that is really looking at this particular overlap, and I'm actually finishing a book for adults that looks at all of this stuff in depth right now. But you know, maybe we can estimate it's 1 in 10 children that's got this overlap going on. So it's happening. It is out there. These kids are not making it up. They are not trying to torture you. If you're listening and you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about specific children and what certain behaviors can mean. That's pretty much what my coaching practice is all about, is helping parents sort out what's legitimate, what's going on, what's manipulative, what they can do to help their kids, so that they can all live joyful, easy lives.
Right, exactly. So I know I put your website there, leadingedgeparenting.com. Is that how they should reach out to you for like a free coaching call, or do you do those?
I do a free coaching call. And if you go to the website, you'll see a little button where you can click on it and you'll see my calendar, and you can go ahead and, sign up right there on the website.
Awesome. And you do only children, or you do adults too?
I work primarily with children. Well, I work primarily with parents. I do sometimes work with their children as well, but I also work with adults because there are a lot of adults who are like me, who do have sensory processing disorder and were never diagnosed as a child, or who are highly sensitive and are just now figuring out that's what's going on. And they're needing some support, some tools and strategies. And so I work with people of all ages.
And I remember you had sent me, maybe it was Elaine. What was Elaine's last name?
Elaine Aron, Aron.
She had like some kind of like a quiz or something for people to take, right?
On her website, she has a quiz both for adults and for children. And that way you can take it. If you're a parent, you can go through the questions about your child. And it's really just an assessment, you know, and when you take that quiz, I think it's, you know, if you check a certain number of lines as being true, or if one line is absolutely true about you, you can be considered highly sensitive. Because it's not a diagnostic, it's really more about a label to understand who you are. There's no right or wrong here. You know, if you identify with being highly sensitive, learn more about it. Learn some tools that can really help you thrive in life. There's, you know, you don't have to fit into every, you know, box. You don't have to tick every box to be highly sensitive. If it sounds like you, if you resonate with this idea, learn more about it and make sure that you're doing everything that you can to really take good care of yourself so that you can move through your day-to-day without feeling overwhelmed or too emotional or at the behest of the world. You want to feel like you are in control of your experience, not that the world is controlling you.
Right. Well, thank you very much for all this information, Melissa. I'm glad we got to talk again on live this time. And again, her podcast is on my website, folks. I have a podcast tab up there on the top. You can see all my podcasts. I've actually interviewed a couple of people lately from the West Coast. Akua was a nurse practitioner. I interviewed her last week, and then Melissa this week. There we go. We got all these great people from the West Coast. We might as well bring them over here to the South. And what better way to do it but virtually?
Well, fun. Thank you so much, Helen. I appreciate
you. I appreciate your time and dealing with me having to push this back just a few minutes. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.